Hello developers, writers, and everyone who loves game design.
Welcome to DLC Not Included, our weekly podcast where we discuss game development, the industry, and everything in between.
We're your hosts, Steele
and Teal. Glad you could join us.
And it is a crisp, cold morning down here in South Texas, and I never thought I'd say that.
It feels really good.
Yeah.
Gets me in the holiday mood.
Teal's been sipping on her hot cocoa. I've had some delicious organic mocha. And we're ready to tackle today's subject.
Absolutely.
I want to give a quick shout out to anyone who's listening to us live. Be sure to ask questions with that podcast question feature, which we will answer at the end of the broadcast.
Yeah.
So the topic that we're tackling today is really important. And if you've been following our series this season, we're kind of talking about the different things you can do to up your game development game.
Right.
Specifically in the development of your game. Well, this one's huge. What are we talking about?
Lighting in your games.
All right.
And we're going to go in depth into this.
We are primarily going to be going over lighting in a 3D game. However, we will be covering 2D as well at the end. So if you're a 2D game developer, if you're developing like a 2D pixel game, we're still going to go over it because lighting is just as important no matter what. In fact,
it is very important.
How important is it?
It's one of the two most vital aspects.
Sorry, I was sitting here drinking.
Oh, okay.
Was I supposed to answer right after you?
Oh, yes. Well, I was just saying that it is one of the two most vital things you can have in your game.
Yes, your game environment, absolutely. The other being audio, of course.
Yeah.
Without it, without lighting, a great game can look like crap with bad lighting. So
yeah, we've said that so often.
You have like the best gameplay, the best mechanics, the prettiest models, the best animations, and if your game is poorly lighted, it's going to look like that.
Yeah, it is. In some cases, it's unplayable.
And your game can be mediocre, but if it's lit well, it's going to look amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And you're going to want to take that into account when you're developing the lighting of your game. Now, with all Studio Blue podcasts, we're not really going to go over a how-to step-by-step. We're instead going to be going over the things you need to consider, the theories behind lighting. But first, let's go over what lighting can be used for.
Okay.
There are 4 things that we kind of pulled together as a list here.
And primarily, I'm going to let you lead on this because you have done lighting, not just as a game developer, but as a film director as well. Cinematographer, yes. Right?
Yes,
that's the word, cinematographer.
Yeah. Okay, so the first one is going to be framing the scene. When we talk about framing the scene in a video game, you can use lighting to draw attention to something that sets the tone. Like, for example, in BioShock, when you enter the bathysphere and you go down, lighting is used on particular parts of the building and specifically put on the sign that says, "Welcome to Rapture." And then on the statue of Andrew Ryan when you arrive in the foyer in the main area.
Yeah.
Lighting is used to set that scene. Your eyes are drawn to the lit statue of Andrew Ryan and the sign that says, "Welcome to Rapture." That's framing.
I remember that. Would framing also be such as the moment when you emerge from the vault in a Fallout game?
100%.
Yeah.
Like in Fallout 4, when you emerge from the vault and everything kind of gets overexposed to a second, because your eyes are not used to all the sunlight out there. And you go high overexposure, and then it comes down and you see the remains of the Commonwealth. That's framing the scene. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's using lighting. It's using exposure specifically.
It does use exposure.
Yes. Yes. The next one is showcasing a moment.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to BioShock because it has a very good example of showcasing a moment right after you arrive in Rapture. Excuse me. You're going through a corridor and there's fires around you. It's very poorly lit. And there's an area of the ceiling busted up above you where light's shining through on the wall in front of you. And you see this shadow of a splicer. And it's kind of showcasing that moment. You get to see that one moment of, oh crap, these are the things I'm going to be fighting against. Another one would be in Alien Isolation when you first see a dead body. And the dead bodies of one of the, I think it's a space marine, is leaning against the wall and he's all bloody and dead. And then the shadow of the xenomorph moves behind you.
Oh.
So you can showcase those moments. You can use lighting to say, hey, this is what you're in for.
Yeah. So also, I don't know. I was trying to think of another example of the showcasing a moment. I could think of like a Zelda game where the light is coming down on the sword.
The Master Sword, right. And then it lights up even more when Link pulls it.
Yeah. That's what really comes to mind for me.
It doesn't always have to be shadows. It can be more light, less light, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you're giving the player a moment of, this is what you're in for, this is what the game is going to be.
Yeah.
Speaking of the player, you can also guide the player with it.
Yeah, that for me is, I think, the most common use of lighting is to guide the player.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in a dark place like a dungeon.
Right, with torches.
A cave with torches lighting the walls. Yeah.
A really good example of how you can use that dynamically is like if you're approaching the big bad guy in his fortress, and as you're walking towards his throne room, he's the only thing lit up. And as you get closer and closer, the braziers of purple doom light up on either side of you as he's giving his evil speech. I mean, that's a very dramatic moment, but you're guiding the player. Very obvious where you're going to go in that situation.
Right.
If you have something a little more nebulous, you could have like you're going through a jungle area, and each of the areas that you're supposed to go to have some bioluminescence.
That's right. Yeah, you can use things like bioluminescence.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be.
It doesn't always have to be torches.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, in general, guys, when you're lighting your scene, remember, natural lighting, whether it be bioluminescence, sunlight, is just as important as artificial lighting like fire.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking of, in Elder Scrolls, some of those caves are lit only by bioluminescence.
Blackreach
is a good example.
Is a very good example of using bioluminescence to make a very well-defined area.
Yeah.
And then the last is gameplay mechanics. If you've ever played a stealth game worth of salt, hiding in the shadows, avoiding the light.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah. Another good one would be, for gameplay mechanics, would be a Plague's Tale. The plague rats that are like literally everywhere. I know we've never played it, but we've seen gameplay footage of it. And one of the things the main character can do is to get rid of people, she can destroy light sources, and then the rats come and kill the person. Because I don't think she can exactly fight.
Yeah.
So, yeah, things like that. So you can use the lighting in a number of ways in order to set the tone for the player, guide the player throughout the game, and then, of course, enrich their gaming experience.
Lighting is extremely important.
Yes, it is.
It's the base of your gameplay there. Your whole experience.
It is indeed.
Well, let's think about this in a 3D game.
You want to talk about lighting a 3D game?
Let's talk about lighting that, because honestly, if you don't have good lighting in a 3D game, you're losing the 3D experience.
Indeed. Also, guys, I'm having a little bit of trouble swallowing right now, so if I'm kind of pausing momentarily during this podcast, hopefully Teal can fill in the blanks, or at least fill in the dead time, because I'm trying to get down whatever little congestion I have.
It's because of the cold.
It is.
Well, before I jump into the 3D game lighting, I just want to remind people that in a 3D game especially, the player is moving constantly. So you need to take that into account when you're creating your lighting. This is not a static scene.
No, it's not.
This is not a picture on the wall. This is a person moving around in a 3D world.
Yes, exactly. If you were lighting a piece of artwork, if you were lighting like a 3D scene that was going to be a static, or heck, even a 3D motion scene like a movie or an animation, you're not going to be considering the fact that the player can dynamically move around.
Right.
So we're going to make sure that we bring that up for every single one of these points. These are things you need to consider when you're lighting your 3D level.
Yeah. Because
we're not going to go through a step-by-step. We want you to take all of this and then apply it to whatever game engine you're using. So, Teal, what is it that sets the mood and tone of a scene via lighting?
There's a bunch of things. I think I should just kind of list them off, and then we can just go through them in detail.
Okay.
Yeah, just to give people a perspective on how much goes into lighting and setting that mood and tone.
Yes.
So we're going to go through direction of light, the luminosity of your light, Exposure, which we already had an example of exposure.
Correct.
Contrast, temperature, attenuation, subject contours, and of course, shadow strength.
Ooh, that's a lot. And
it's a lot of concepts that go into lighting. But you've got to have every single one of these.
There is more than this, but these are the ones that we found were the most common.
Okay. Says the cinematographer.
Okay, the first thing to go over is the direction. Okay. Because the direction of your light is just as important as the location of your subject and the location of your player.
Yeah.
And here's the reason why. Where your light is coming from, and whether it's like one light or a 3-point light or whatever, that is just as important as where your subject is, because that's going to show what part of your subject is revealed. By the way, when I say subject, I'm talking about thing of focus.
Yeah.
It could be your entire scene, for example. So you're going to want to consider the direction of your light, whether you're lighting up one person in a room or the room itself or the whole house the room is in, and take each one in components. If you're going to be lighting a full house for your level, look at each room and look at the light sources coming into that room. Mm-hmm. Look at the sunlight. Does the sunlight come in through the blinds? Are the lamps lit? Are they creating any light? Is someone holding a flashlight? Same thing with the hallway. Do you have like little lights up on the ceiling? Do you have lights trailing up the staircase because they're decorated for Christmas?
Yeah,
so
thought about that.
All of these things you need to take into account as we go through this list. Mm-hmm. It's not just like a single person in the dark and a spotlight shining on them, although that is something you can do.
That's something to do, but yeah.
So when you're looking at your subject, be it a person, a room, etc., think about that direction, because the player is going to have the light contour, reveal, etc., whatever that's coming in. Like right now, in the studio, I'm looking at Teal, and there are several lights hitting her, but the light that's hitting her the most is the one that's over by our chairs off to the side. And it's lighting up the left side of her face really hard, while the other lights are kind of filling it in, making the shadows softer. It's what is known in cinematography as the 3-point lighting.
There we go.
Key lighting is the main light. Filler light kind of cuts down to the hardness of the shadows, and then there's a backlight. In your game, think about that. Think about where the light's going to come from and how the light from that direction is going to influence the reveal of the things that are in that space, whether it be one person or a dozen things.
Well, that leads us to our next point, which is luminosity.
Yes.
The amount of light on the subject.
Right.
How much of the subject is revealed.
Right. How much is going to be shown by the light sources.
Because you mentioned, by the side of my face. Mm-hmm. Well, what if that was just one light shining? That's
going to create a very different feel than what we have right now, which is several lights here in the studio.
Right.
You can create, they have the old adage, one light above equals romance, one light below equals horror. I think it was George who told me that. But that's a really good example.
It is, yeah.
When you light, like for example, let's talk about Boris Karloff as Frankenstein.
Oh, that's a good one.
Whenever Boris Karloff was coming towards the camera, like I think really slowly to kill someone, it was a darkened area and they just had a single light shining below him.
Yeah.
When a light is shining just below a subject, like a person, it lights up everything except the top. And that is very unnatural looking. We're not used to not seeing the top of a person's head. So in doing that, it creates severe unease. And then you have, of course, the horrific music and the stalking and the creepy face. And that creates a horror scene. You could also have low-level lighting, just revealing enough of a subject, whether it be an object, a person, the contents of a room, an area. And that could create an element of mystery. Just enough that the player knows there's something there, but not enough to show them all the details.
A perfect example is in Phasmophobia, when you walk into a house and before you turn the power on, things are darkened. And when you turn the power on, there's a few lights that come on, sure, but not everything is lit.
And that's something to consider. Remember, the player's going to be moving through the scene.
That's right.
So if an area near a desk is really well lit because of a lamp that's on, yet the rest of the room is really dark, their attention's going to be drawn to that desk. So you're using that luminosity to bring their attention to something.
Yeah.
If the whole area is really well lit, if it's very pretty and very colorful, like if they walk into a fairy glen and there's light everywhere, the trees are sparkling and they have little motes of light floating around, and each one of those little motes of light, the greens, the blues, the reds, cast a little bit of red, green, or blue light nearby. Mm-hmm. That's going to create wonderment and sensation because you're overloading the senses with beauty and color. So you can use that luminosity, the level of light, to invoke a different emotion in your player.
Yeah, either fear or safety.
Right, fear, safety, wonderment, happiness. You could have it be their character's love interest, where just a little bit of light shines on one side of the face, accenting the curve of their lips. That could create a feeling of romance, seduction, desire. And that's everything we're doing. We're trying to evoke an emotion in our players.
Yes.
Let's move on to exposure, because we kind of talked about that already.
We did. Exposure, of course, is too little or too much light. Done on purpose.
Done on purpose, right. Don't use, I don't know how to light, as I'm using exposure.
Right.
Now, you can have happy little accidents. We can go with the Bob Ross of game design here. You can have your happy little accidents. But make sure that you are using that as an excuse as little as possible.
Yep.
Because most of the time when you have too much lighting or too little lighting, it almost immediately shows. But when done on purpose, too little lighting can create an air of mystery. Again, let's walk into that dark room.
That's right, yeah.
There's a little bit of light over on the desk showing maybe a paper. There's a flickering candle off to the side that just shows a hand that's moving in and out of the light's radius while you hear the rocking.
Of a rocking chair that you can't see.
That you can't see. You just see the hand moving in and out just a little bit. And then you hear the voice say, Mr. James, that paper, you should read it. That's an air of mystery. And you've used underexposure. Overexposure. Fallout 4 is a very good example.
Yeah, when you first emerge from Vault 111, everything is just bright. And then it comes down. And then you see the entire vista of the wasteland.
And what that does is that creates in you the confusion the sole survivor feels.
Yeah. Of
what has happened to my world. Because remember, the beginning of the game, pre-bombs. Everything's fine. It's happy.
Everything is well lit, and it's got color, and it feels very safe.
And then you will come out, you have this overexposure, there's a sense of confusion, and then you see the absolute devastation of the Commonwealth post-bombs.
Yeah.
So yeah, use exposure. Speaking of light and the amount of light, contrast is also really important.
Yes, the difference between light and shadow.
Right. Higher contrast is going to draw more attention. Let's go back to our person in the rocking chair.
Okay.
Okay, so all you see is his hand going back and forth, and then he takes the candle, picks it up, and holds it so that you can see his face. But you only see the left side of his face. There's a very stark shadow line, the line between where the left side of his face starts and the shadows covering the right side of his face begins is really stark. Yes. Very highly defined, a high level of contrast. It is going to draw attention to the left side of his face. And then you, the animator or whoever, can use things like his eyelid widening a little bit, or his pupil contracting, or his eye looking down or looking up, or staring at you unblinkingly. That's creepy. Ooh, the left side of his mouth moving. Maybe there's a scar on there to, extenuate whatever this guy's been through as he talks to Mr. Jim. Yeah. That kind of thing. And then if he moves the candle over to his right side and you see that his right eye is a glass eye.
There you go.
And it's staring at you, the smoky glass eye. You've now used that reveal and you've used that lighting to really give the player a squick moment. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing you can do with contrast. Because if your scene is super well lit and they see the left side of his face pretty well, but they can also kind of see the right side of his face and see the glass eye, you've just killed the mood. You killed the reveal.
You killed the reveal.
So use your contrast. And remember, the player's going to be moving around. So if it's a scene where the player can move freely, like in Bioshock, where there is no locked, except for the moment you kill Andrew Ryan, there is no locked camera. It doesn't matter where they move. Your lighting is such a way that they're only going to see the right side, that one side of his face that doesn't have the glass eye until you move the light. Yeah. So keep that in mind.
So please keep that in mind. Your player is going to be moving around, walking around. Right. So let's not have the whole man behind the curtain moment.
Right. The higher, the more definition you give to your light while you're designing your 3D scene, and the more detail you put into what is and is not lit, what parts of your room, what parts of your scene, what parts of your subject are and are not lit at every moment.
At every moment,
whether
every
it be
angle.
something cinematic
Mm-hmm.
or something playable, etc. That the more detail you put into that, the more effort you put into that, the more your player will be beholden to your lighting scheme.
Yeah. It's all about the impact.
Yes. And most players are not going to move in an area where they can't see what's being lit. Most are not.
Most are not,
Most
right.
are not.
Well, let's talk about temperature, because we've talked about the direction and how much and too little light. But let's talk about the actual temperature of the light.
Yeah, color temperature usually measured in Kelvin, and it is the warmth or coldness of the light. The colder the light, the more they go towards the blue spectrum.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
The warmer the light, the more towards the orange spectrum. And when a light is cool, it creates a feeling of distance and impersonal. Death, unpassioned, emotionless, etc.
Very sterile.
Very sterile. When it's warm, it's inviting, personal, friendly. It can go all the way. I mean, warm lighting can also be something's on fire, and you could also go the other way where cool lighting is a refreshing Arctic area. But for the most part, cool lighting creates a feeling of impersonal, while warm creates a feeling of personal. And you can kind of use that as a general rule of thumb. So make sure when you're lighting your scene to take that into account. You also normally don't want to have a dark scene that has one cool light source and one warm light source, unless you're trying to draw attention to that juxtaposition.
Yeah, unless that's on purpose.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't be like, well, I'm going to have this really cool fluorescent light here, and it's going to be this really cool color, and I'm going to have these candles over here that are warm. Unless you know what you're doing, unless it's on purpose, it's going to look weird. It's difficult to pull off. It can be done, but don't just do it willy-nilly. Think about it, plan it ahead of time.
Yes, please do.
A really good example of doing that well is if you have like an Arctic or tundra scene that's all lit cold. The sun's cold. The scattered light that's coming off of the snow and the trees, everything is on the cool temperature.
Everything is on a cold temperature.
But then the campfire is warm.
Yeah.
That's on purpose, that's fine.
Or you go into the cave and it's warm because there's a fire in there. Yeah.
Right. And then someone turns on a very cold, stark flashlight that's on the cold side of the spectrum, and it draws attention to this unnatural source in this otherwise natural place.
Yeah.
So you can use color temperature that way, but plan it. Don't just toss in a bunch of lights and call yourself awesome. Typically speaking, when I've worked in cinema in the past, we've always very purposefully chosen the color palette of the light, the scene, specifically based off of what whoever was in charge was doing. Okay, let's move on to attenuation, because we've talked about this nonstop.
Yes, we have. Attenuation is light falling off away from the light source.
Oh yes. I'm going to give a couple of examples, and I'm going to try to drink this before it gets cold. A good way is this, okay? When a light source exists in a scene, this is a good rule of thumb. Mm-hmm. When a light source exists in a scene, a player is going to want to be drawn to it, whether they're seeing it and wanting to go to whatever it's lighting up, or if they're holding it and wanting it to stay lit, like a torch or a lantern in a cave. So that's a very good rule of thumb. And you can use attenuation, which is where the light starts to fall off until it no longer lights anything up, to create those feelings of safety, danger, reveal, mystery, etc. A real good example of using it in a way that denotes mystery is you have a darkened area and you hear the match strike, and the match strikes and the hand is holding the match. And you see the hand and the fingers really well, but about the time it starts getting to the wrist, it starts to fade, it starts to attenuate. And you just see maybe a cuff of a shirt with a cuff link on it, but the light is attenuating just enough that you can't read what's on the cuff link. You know there's something there, a symbol or initials, but you can't read it because the light is starting to attenuate, and then it's gone before it even reaches the rest of the sleeve. That's a feeling of mystery.
Yeah, it is.
You're using that fall off to tease the player, but not actually give them the information.
Yeah.
A way it can be used for a sense of danger.
Okay.
You're in a cave and you're holding a torch and you see things moving just right outside of the fall off. So you see eyes moving around, and as you get closer and that light starts to light up the area, it goes into the attenuated fall off, into that zone of lighting. whatever it is moves back and you just see the lights. Just see the eyes. Just see the eyes.
Yeah.
So they're just out of view. And then your torch starts to fail and that sphere starts to close in, as do the eyes. That creates a feeling of danger. Let me drink this real quick.
Yeah. So that's a really good use of attenuation. Changing between safety and danger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of the changing between safety and danger, in your example, you were using that to kind of talk about the rats, the things, the
plague
creatures,
rats.
the plague rats. Yeah.
Plague's tale innocence.
So you were talking about that, and that leads me to my next thing of subject contours, because what you were doing is you were kind of outlining the shape of these rats. You were kind of outlining it, and then they go backwards.
And they would be seen as a mass of rats, a writhing mass of rats.
A writhing mass, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're kind of outlining them.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is in relation to the shadows, the darkness of the environment.
Right. You can use contrast and contours really well together.
Yes, they do pair well.
In the case Teal just brought up with the mass of rats in A Plague's Tale Innocence, you have that stark contrast between where the torchlight that the main character's holding hits and the rats that are moving around them. Just wanting to stay out of the view of the fire.
Right. Yeah. They don't actually go into the light itself,
but they stay within that attenuated area.
Yes.
And you see it's literally a writhing mass of rats, and you know that if that torch in her hand goes out, they're going to devour you whole.
Yeah.
So it creates that sort of feeling of tension by looking at the contours of just the rats themselves.
Yeah.
Another good example that we used earlier was the lover example.
Oh, yeah, that one, yeah.
The contours of your lover's face as it shines in the light, in this romantic scene you're going to have. The way the shape of the face is on the side, the profile, the lips, the chin, the nose. Those are things that draw out a feeling of sensuality, which is important in a romantic scene.
Right.
Same thing starkly, our dude with the glass eye. Let's say his nose is pointed. Let's say his chin is a bit on the shallow side.
Yeah.
Let's say his teeth have a little bit of, a bite to them. Like they look like they could be just a little on the sharp side.
Yeah.
Those are all contours. If his face is wrinkly because he's old, that, a real good example of a game that uses lighting specifically for contours is Until Dawn.
That's right.
Each time you look at the characters on the loading screen, between going from like Sam to Emily and all of them, their faces lit up, and you can actually see just the contours of their face really well.
Yeah.
So that it's drawn to show, the heroine character, Sam, who's really brave, has softer features that are more relatable, while Emily, the biatch, has harder features that make her a little less, quote unquote, pretty.
Yeah.
Or the guy, the therapist. Who talks to you between levels as well. His face is just lit in just one area, so he has that air of like mystery about him.
Yeah.
Like he's both narrating and controlling your destiny at the same time. So that's a good way of using contours. And this is relation to the model that you're lighting, guys. Okay? Whether it be a single person or a whole scene, take those into account. Contours are usually only with characters. I say using air quotes.
Yeah.
So take that into account. How's your contour of your character shaped?
Yeah.
All right.
And be careful of perspective too.
Yeah, it's very important
because if your player is moving around, watch out that they are not able to move around to a part that you didn't want lit. Or that they could see.
Or take that into account. Like, for example, if they're completely interactive during that romance scene with your lover, maybe she's holding a candle that contours her body and her face, and as your character moves, she moves as well, so that the contours stay in the view.
Yeah.
That's something to consider. Also, this is where you as the designer got to decide, is this going to be a fully interactable sequence, or is it a cutscene? Got to keep that into account.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah, keep that in mind. Okay, and then the last one's going to be shadow strength.
Right. So harder edge shadows versus those softer edges.
Right. Help showcase the ambience.
Yeah.
When you go outside and you have light hitting from the sun in all areas, shadows around you are going to be a lot softer. And by softer shadows, I mean the fall off from where the shadow starts to where the shadow kind of vanishes into nothingness. A softer shadow, those edges are going to look fuzzy or blurry, or they're going to be less defined.
It's going to be a gradual increase in the shadow. It's going to be bright and then just gradually.
And if it's a small thing, like you know, in a cloud, like if you go walk outside in a cloudy day, you're only going to see like a little blotch of darkness at your feet.
Oh, yeah.
You're not going to see much of anything at all because the whole sky is reflecting in all directions.
Mm-hmm.
Games need to be the same way.
Oh, yeah.
Use your skylighting. Skylighting is very powerful and often overlooked by people who are new to game development in 3D. They always like, oh, it's the sunlight. It's the sunlight. You know, like if you're in the Unreal Engine, that huge directional light that lights up your whole scene that people use as the sun or the moon. They always say that is the most important thing. Well, that is key lighting, but you also want to use that skylight.
Yeah.
If it's a cloudy day, that skylight's going to be lighting up everything from all directions, and your shadows are going to be a lot softer.
Mm-hmm.
Contrastedly, if it's a very clear day, that sun is going to come down, and you're going to see your shadow like the freaking hedgehog on Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Hedgehog. You're going to see a very stark shadow, a very hard shadow.
Yeah.
And a hard shadow is one where the edges are very clearly defined. Because we can walk outside on a summer day, and our shadow is going to be as well defined as we are. We walk outside on a cloudy day like today, we're hardly going to see our shadow at all. So keep that in account.
Yeah. I have a good game example of using the shadow strength of hard edge shadows, and that's in the first Kingdom Hearts. In the prologue, when Sora is going through that dream sequence, he's climbing the staircases and he's going to the stained glass platforms.
Yes.
Part of the platform is lit with bright light, and then the rest of it is in stark darkness.
That's right. And that shadow of his is what turns into the dark side boss.
Yes.
So that is a very good example. I mean, and that's an older game too. That's 2003.
Yeah.
And they do use lighting in that sequence very, very well, especially the use of shadows.
Yeah.
And a lot of later games do that. I mentioned BioShock, that first splicer, that's a hard shadow that's used really well.
That's right. Yeah.
Any horror game worth the salt is going to use shadows.
Absolutely.
To both tease and terrify the player. So that's all of this. Everything we've just given, you as the developer need to consider when you're designing the lighting in your scenes.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. You're going to put as much work into lighting as you do into audio and gameplay.
Yes.
In fact, I dare say that if you want to be a good developer who makes good looking 3D games, be prepared to put as much time into lighting a scene as you do into making the scene. So if it takes you 2 hours to model a room, to make a room, expect to spend about 2 hours lighting it perfectly.
That's a good rule of thumb, actually.
It is. And then 2 hours putting audio in there. So congratulations. This room's going to take you 6 hours to make, but it's going to look and sound amazing.
But it's going to be amazing.
Now let's shift over to 2D, because I know we have a lot of 2D developers that listen to us.
Yes.
Okay, so first off, we're going to talk about 2D as well as 3D on a restricted plane. So that's 3D that looks 2D. Like a 2D side scroller that happens to be in a 3D environment.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The theory and best practices are exactly the same.
Yeah, because lighting is lighting.
Yeah. You're going to do a few different things in 2D, but the core concepts we just came into, luminosity, attenuation, shadow strength, all of that, take all of that and port that over to this.
Yeah.
Don't discount it just because you're in a 2D game. Now, when you're doing 3D on a 2D plane, like if you're making a game in Unity or Unreal, but you're locking the camera on one axis.
Right.
Light everything from the viewpoint of the camera. That's a good rule of thumb to work with. So if your character is moving X and Y, up and down and right and left, and your camera just moves in that direction and never moves in and out, then light based on that.
Yeah. Because it's all about the camera's perspective.
And if your camera shifts, be prepared to take that into account. So it's like if your character is going, down a hallway and it's scrolling right and left, and then they're going to hit a hallway that goes into the Z-axis, depth, into the scene, and the camera's going to shift and the whole thing's going to shift over, be prepared to light that new area, taking that into account.
Yeah.
So always look from the perspective of the camera when you're lighting your scene. By the way, if you make a 2D game like this, and you can go into a full 3D cutscene, you're going to make your job very difficult, and I highly recommend those areas that are fully 3D in look be lit differently than the 2D. Try to keep them separated.
Yeah.
Just because it's going to be difficult. You can pull it off. You can pull off a 2D side-scrolling game that has 3D cutscenes and it all looks amazing, but you're going to be putting in a ton of work. You can do it, though.
Yeah, it can be done.
It just, how much work do you want to put into the lighting?
Now, lighting is a little different when you're trying to light a 2D game in a 2D engine.
Right.
Because even if you're using pixel art, you do need to use your additive layers. You need to layer. That's so very important.
Additive.
Because you've got to simulate your light sources.
Yes. Torches, spotlights, sunlight, God rays, etc.
Right. You're going to need to use those layers.
Yes, and you're going to be drawing it in. You're going to be drawing your light.
So get good with the pen.
Yeah. If you're going to create light rays, you're going to go ahead and draw on your light rays or get your PNG of your light rays, and you're going to add it using an additive feature, an additive filter.
Yeah.
So do not put a lighting layer onto your 2D engine and then just lower the opacity.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
No.
It looks like you're covering that area.
Yeah.
Now you can lower the opacity. That's fine. In fact, God rays should be that way. You should bring in your God ray layer onto your 2D engine, put an additive on there so it's being added. Let me explain what additive is.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's several ways you can put a 2D image over another 2D image. There's multiple ways. The first is normal. It just overlays it. And if you take away opacity, it fades it out and makes it less intense. That's called normal. That's just, you're just putting it on there. Then there's additive. What additive means is it takes the colors of that layer and mathematically, I say using air quotes, adds it to the layer below it. So if it's a yellow dot in the middle of your screen and you're putting additive, all that stuff below that yellow dot is going to be whatever color it is with yellow added to it.
Yeah.
A tint change. So you create your lights in your Photoshop, GIMP, whatever, to have whatever color temperature you want, whether it be a nice warm tone, a cool tone, etc. It doesn't matter. And then you add it to the layer on top of it and you make it additive. And then you lower the opacity and it will look like a light source instead of you just adding a colored dot.
Right.
And make sure to use that attenuation, by the way, guys.
Yes.
Have
very
that
important.
sphere, that circle, attenuate. So it starts off really bright, and then at a certain point it starts to fade, and then it becomes nothing. Because again, unless you're creating like a stark spotlight, you want to have attenuation.
Yes. That's realistic.
I would love to see a game where stark spotlights with just the tiniest bit of fading, just a teeny little bit, little, like 5 pixels of fading, are used to really just light up a subject and a goal. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, use additive layers for everything. Oh, and then the last one's subtractive. You're not really going to use that for what we're talking about, but that would subtract the color. So if you had that yellow dot, it would subtract yellow from whatever's underneath it. Okay.
Yeah. So on the inverse, you could also use black flattened versions of your sprites to vary the opacity.
Varying the opacity? For what? What would you...
Or you can to simulate shadows.
Oh, okay. So
So yeah, for example, you have a bunch of God ray lights coming in through a window, right? You have your sun rays, and there is a chair there.
Okay.
And you want to have the shadow come out from the chair, kind of elongated behind it, right? Right. So that's what you're going to use the flattened version
of the chair. So you would take the chair sprite, kind of flatten it out, make it pure black. And then kind of stretch it out?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that would be a good idea. So you would basically simulate a shadow by taking into account the direction and strength of your light.
Yes.
And then take that sprite, make a blackened version of it, put it underneath the chair, obviously. Right. And then stretch it out, and then add opacity to it, depending on how strong the shadow is going to be.
Right.
Okay. All right. You still have to consider, though, your lighting from every source on every subject.
That's true.
That never changes. Use that to set your scene. You do not get a free pass just because it's a 2D game in a pixel-based engine. You still have to consider your lighting as if you were developing a 3D game.
Yes.
Consider where the lamps come from, the sun comes from, the candles that your lover's coming from, the lantern that the old man who's giving you his prophecy. All of that has to be taken into account. The flashlight that lights up your area so the ghost doesn't get you. All of that's needed.
All of that is needed.
You do not get a free pass on forgetting about anything that has to do with lighting just because it's a 2D game.
Yeah. Because you still want realism.
You want realism. If you're making your game in a 2D based engine and you're not using lighting, your game is going to look amateurish.
Oh, yeah.
No matter what. Now,
yeah.
I say no matter what. There are examples where that's not the case. A game that looks like it's basically doodled is going to look fine without heavy amounts of lighting.
Sure.
But you still want a level of lighting. A flat game without lighting looks like a flat game.
It's very flat, trust me.
And there's no reason nowadays with all the tools that developers have that you can't create a pixel-based 2D game that looks amazing with some level of lighting.
Yeah.
All right, so now it's time for us to take questions from our live audience.
If you've been watching, remember to use the podcast question feature that's in our chat.
Cost 50 channel points, which is like 5 minutes of watching us.
That's right. While we're waiting for questions, I actually want to go back and touch something on our 3D game engine.
Okay.
On 3D engines, you need to consider your resources.
Oh, yes.
If you have low resources, you want to bake your lighting.
Oh, right, because baking your lighting, which is... Can I explain baked lighting?
Yeah, go ahead and explain baked lighting.
Okay, because we've been over this before in talking about our Unreal Engine stuff. Baking your lighting means you take all of your light sources. The engine will, during rendering, not real-time rendering, but pre-rendering, will take all of that into account and will create what's called a light map.
Yeah.
And it's basically the way the lights fall on individual objects, individual parts of the scene, the textures, the shaders, etc. And it bakes it into the scene as a shader, a texture, a graphical representation of light. And that is really low-level resource intensive. It's easy to work with. Your scene is not going to break. Your engine's not going to shutter. So if you have a ton of really complex lighting sources, especially your sun, if your sun's not moving, bake that sucker.
Yeah, yes, please, bake it.
Also, quick side note before we move on to the next part of lighting, if you can, turn dynamic shadows off of all your foliage, grass, and trees, because that'll kill your CPU.
Please do. Now, if you, on the other side of the spectrum, if you have high resources, right, you can use dynamic lighting. But understand that dynamic lighting is very resource intensive.
Yes. The more dynamic lights you have, the more resources it's going to eat. A dynamic light is, a light that moves, a light that creates the shadows in real time, that lights the subject in real time, usually through the use of ray tracing. So if you have a lot of those, it's going to start draining your resources. Torches, lanterns, flashlights. Not lights that turn on and off. You can bake those in.
Right.
But lights that you move around.
That flicker, that have a life of their own. Yeah, that's all dynamic. That all is going to take resources.
Now, don't be worried if you have an engine worth of salt and a computer worth of salt. 5, 6, 7, a dozen in a scene isn't going to kill it.
No.
But hundreds will. You will bring any computer down to its knees with tons and tons of dynamic lights. And that's just the way it is. That's why particle effects are a wonderful way to, and we've talked about this.
Yes, we have.
To do things with light sources that are small and are going to not be around the entire time. Let's talk about the fairy glade.
Yeah, that's a good example.
The little sprites that I talked about. Little motes of light that are blue, green, and red, and they're moving around. And as they get close to something, they change the color to blue, green, or red, because their lights are coming from within it.
Right.
Those are all dynamic light sources. However, they have a finite life.
Yes.
They're going to spawn into existence. They're going to exist for a amount of time, and then they're going to die. And in doing so, you're not having 100 light sources in a scene. You're having maybe 24 of these tiny light sources that at any one time.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider. It's a
good workaround, I'll tell you that.
It really truly is. Okay, since I'm not seeing any questions popping up on our live chat, hopefully this has helped you guys.
Oh, there we go.
Just as we're getting ready to go.
Okay, we got a question from Burke. Burke says, great conversation on how to set up lighting and some guidelines to keep in mind as a developer. How do you feel, or on what context would it make sense to give some lighting control to the player? Only example I can think of right now is God of War 3, where light could be used to reveal hidden things or chests, and could also be used as an assist weapon. Don't know if you have more to illustrate. Also, you could feel when speaking of romantic setups, Steele was looking at his muse. Yes, thank you.
We really need to screen these questions ahead of time because Burke likes to sneak these comments in.
Oh, I love Burke.
Okay.
But he's got a good question here.
Very good question. Anytime and every time that you want to have the player have control over lighting, whether it be through a flashlight, a lantern, a torch, it doesn't matter. You need to take that into account completely. And it's okay. You should. You should. Like a horror game without a flashlight it feels weird.
It's really weird.
You can do it, but it feels weird.
Yeah, like in Phasmophobia, everything is dark in the house until you turn your flashlight on.
Yeah, purposely.
And then that flashlight is got very high contrast. You've got this concentration of light that lights things, and then darkness.
Let me give you an example of a horror game that has no player-controlled lighting and does it really well. Layers of Fear. You don't carry a lantern. You don't carry a candle. So you have to actually look for the light sources when it starts to get dark, and that's, so light source over there. Not only is it guidance, but it's also safety. Light source over there, and you can follow the trail. If the player had a light source in Layers of Fear, it would work a little differently.
It would be very different.
It'd be very different.
Yeah.
So if your character has some kind of a light source, we're just going to say a flashlight for now.
Okay.
You want to take that into account that the flashlight reveals. The flashlight can reveal clues, gameplay direction, objectives, safety, danger. I mean, there's nothing in the world that's going to be scarier to a player when they walk into a dark room and they have their flashlight and they go, okay, cool, I found the key I'm looking for. Then they hear a sound, they turn around, and there's like the evil killer clown. That's the flashlight just became a tool against them. So when you're using a lighting source that the player controls, use it to enhance their experience positively and negatively.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah.
Good question, Burke. Okay.
Our next question is from KB Kingdom. They ask, you may have mentioned this earlier, but when do you want to leave a light source unbaked?
And it depends on the engine on how you would do that, but basically don't bake a light source that's going to be dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and the good thing is most engines automatically do it. Like in Unreal, for example, if you call it static or movable, I think, then it bakes the lighting, I believe. If it's movable, no, it's movable. Yeah, sorry. Well, let me start over. In the Unreal Engine, if it's stationary, it bakes the lighting. If it's movable, it's dynamic.
Yeah.
So a movable light in Unreal won't bake. It's dynamic. It changes. The engine updates in real time. So to answer your question, KV, if it's going to be a dynamic light, don't bake it. Tell the engine it's going to be a dynamic light. The engine will do the rest.
Yeah.
If your engine can't differentiate between the two, get a new engine. But I don't know of any competent 3D engine that doesn't do that.
Yeah, they all do that now.
They have to.
Yeah.
I mean, lighting is so essential nowadays in gaming that any engine worth of salt is going to differentiate between what should be baked, what should be dynamic, and how to handle all that hoss.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, we're going to end. I do like the fact that you brought up the resource thing, Teal. That is a good thing to consider because a lot of new developers in 3D engines just want to make everything dynamic because they're so beautiful when you can move your lights around, they can do cool things, and you can change it on a whim. And then, so that way if a lamp gets kicked across the room, it's dynamic and the light moves with it and then it shatters. Yeah, but that's fine, but don't have to make the ceiling, lights. They don't have to be dynamic.
No, they don't.
Save yourself some resources.
Please.
Everything you can do to squeeze optimization out of your engine, take advantage of that.
Take advantage of it.
Because you never know the lower level game systems that the players are going to have, that minimum requirement.
Yeah, make sure. Yeah, that's certainly important. Make sure you keep minimum requirements in mind of your players' systems.
All right, I do not see any more questions. This was a very in-depth topic. This is going to be one of our longer ones. This one's almost clocking in at an hour, which is fine because lighting you have to put a lot of effort into.
You got to have a big focus on lighting to make your game.
You truly do.
Really shine.
You truly do. You just keep it as a rule of thumb, guys. If you spend 2 hours creating your scene, you're probably going to spend 2 hours lighting it.
Yeah.
If you spend 3 hours creating your scene, 3 hours lighting it. As you get better and better at lighting, you're going to notice that time scale go down.
Sure.
There are people whose job it is in the game development industry to light levels properly. So you could become a light designer if you were good enough and you want to do that. But don't underplay it and don't ignore it. don't rush through lighting your scene just because you run out of time. If you create a 3D game or a 3D whatever for a game jam, give yourself as much time designing that level as you're going to put into lighting it.
Yeah. So there it is.
And then equal amount to audio. And you'll have a banger level. All right, so we want to give a thank you to every single person who is listening to us live and asking those questions. You guys are amazing. And all the huge shout outs to those listening in the VODs, whether it be iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, etc., etc., etc. You guys make DLC not included wonderful. I do apologize for all the stutters and sputters on my end, but I am really congested in my throat because of the weather right now. So thank you for bearing with me. All right, we love you guys to death. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time on DLC Not Included. And remember,
anyone can give you the key, but you have to go through the door.